Inclusion isn't optional. It's our duty and our privilege to make sure that every student is given the opportunity to learn and participate to the best of their abilities. And as teachers, it's our job to figure out what accommodations need to be made to ensure that happens. But it's never okay just to leave that student out of an activity because it's too hard for us, or to assume that they can't do something, or even that they don't want to do something, which from a lot of experience, that may well be the case.
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for Teachers, the go-to show dedicated to teachers who want to make a big difference in education. Whether you're in your first few years or well into your teaching career, we are here to inspire, support, and empower you with bite-sized tips, simple strategies, and the motivation to lead an education revolution, one classroom at a time.
We're Ashley and Alicia from Rainbow Sky Creations, two Aussie teachers who love all things teaching and learning. We are here to help you thrive as you work toward making an impact in your students' lives while loving your life as a teacher.
We are here to help you bring joy, simplicity, and creativity into your classroom on the daily, because
there are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable.
Let's get into today's episode.
Rainbow Sky Creations acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we record this podcast on, the Dharawal and Whadjuk Noongar people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for Teachers. I'm so glad that you can join me for today's episode. I'm thrilled to let you know that we are joined by Eliza Rudston. Not only is she a proud mother of 3 beautiful teenagers, but she also brings over 22 years of teaching experience to the table. Eliza's insights will leave you inspired and ready to make a difference. Teacher's journey has been incredibly diverse, from working as a mainstream teacher to a relief teacher, and with the majority of her career spent in support units. Now, her wealth of experience includes working with students with Down syndrome, ADHD, autism, and mental health and behavioural challenges. Now, in this conversation, we dive into her book, Confidently Teach Students with Autism, and explore practical strategies, my favourite bit, the heartwarming stories, and the importance of inclusivity in every classroom. Now, whether you're a seasoned educator or just starting your teaching journey, Eliza's insights will leave you inspired and ready to make a difference. Let's jump into today's episode. You've written a book to support teachers in creating inclusive classrooms for students with autism. To set the stage for our conversation, could you start with us, Eliza, by explaining what is autism?
Sure. So autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and it affects individuals in really different ways, but it affects them in how they interact with others and also how they experience the world around them. So each person with autism has different strengths and challenges unique to them, but some of the ways it can present might be challenges with communicating and interacting with others, or repetitive and different behaviors like moving their bodies in different ways, strong interest in one topic or subject, maybe unique reactions to what they see, hear, smell, touch, or taste, or maybe even preferences for routines and dislike to change. But I think what's really important as well is to address the language that we use when talking about autism. There's not a single term that all individuals prefer when referring to their diagnosis. Some people prefer first-person language. So that would mean saying a person with autism. And this is the sort of language that we've been encouraged to use in the past, especially this is what we were taught at uni, for example. And I think a lot of people in the community would be familiar with that type of language. However, there is a real shift from the autistic community towards diagnosis first language. And that would mean saying an autistic person. So this reflects that autism is an integral part of who they are as a person. It's really important for us to ask the individual what their preferred language is. For me, though, the parents and students that I've encountered over the years have preferred first-person language. So that is what I use now and what I have used in my book. I also feel really strongly that my students are first and foremost my students, hence the title, Confidently Teach Students with Autism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back to my training and how it shifted was a person with autism.
Yeah.
In terms of their identity isn't all just put into that package of being
Yeah.
autistic. There is so many more facets to them. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? With a neurodevelopment condition, it's so diverse. There's still so much to learn about brains and how brains operate, that one being labelled with a student with autism isn't going to show the same characteristics, traits as other students with autism. I think that's why it makes it such a challenge, really, isn't it? Of trying to work out what is the best formula for that student, but may not be the same for the other student.
Yeah, and it can just change like that as well. Whatever is working now won't always work. Yeah.
It's the age of being in education or having the privilege of knowing someone with autism, that you have to have this flexibility and this fluidity on how you approach things. But also, it's a two-edged sword because you still need those consistencies and boundaries in place. You're an educator. You've likely experienced moments that deeply shaped your perspective on inclusion. If you could dedicate your book to one of those moments or a particular student who inspired you, what story would you share with us?
Okay, I can't pick one, so I've had to pick two.
But even better.
The most impactful experience for me was actually before I even became a teacher. My dad told me about how his sister was treated in school in the 1940s. She had an intellectual disability and there was absolutely no accommodations made for her. So in those days, individuals with a disability were generally just put into institutions, but my grandmother wanted so much more for her, and she insisted that she attend the local school and be included with her peers, which was incredibly different to the thoughts of the day. Unfortunately, if she couldn't do the work that was set for her, she would just get into trouble and be put into the hall and made to sit there. But as a result, my grandmother, who was incredibly headstrong, she became a real advocate for the rights of people with disability at that time, which was fabulous. So something good did come from that. But learning about her treatment just made me so angry. And that's really impacted the way I viewed inclusion throughout my years of teaching. But this experience also relates really closely. It's actually a story that's in my book at the start of chapter 4, Inclusive Education Practices. Shall I read it to you?
Oh, look, if you're willing to share a snippet.
Yeah, so this is about a kid that I taught. Names have been changed. I once had the privilege of teaching a wonderful boy named Elijah. He had Down syndrome. He was an incredibly active child, full of energy and enthusiasm, who loved to run, jump, and climb. When the school athletics carnival approached, I was eager for him to join his peers and experience the excitement alongside them. However, my superior expressed concerns about Elijah's smaller stature and physical abilities, suggesting that it might not be appropriate for him to participate. As his teacher, it was my duty to advocate for his right to inclusion. Ultimately, Elijah was able to attend the carnival and compete in long jump, shot put, discus, and the 100-meter race. The sheer joy on his face as he bowed to the cheering crowd while crossing the finish line is a memory I will cherish forever. It serves as a powerful reminder that all students deserve the opportunity to be included, regardless of their intellectual or physical capabilities. Yeah, that story just, not that real life experience for me. It almost makes me want to cry because I can remember him doing that bow, and yeah, it was really beautiful. But yeah, to answer the question, how have these experiences influenced my journey to the book? Although neither of these stories is about a student with autism, the principles of inclusion hold true for all students with additional needs. The lack of understanding I came across from time to time was quite infuriating, but also just knowing that a lot of teachers want to be inclusive in their classrooms, but they're struggling to cater to the diverse needs within their classroom. I knew I had a lot of knowledge to share after 22 years of teaching, and I wanted to give teachers the tools that they needed to improve their teaching strategies. And so far, the response has been quite positive.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one thing about teachers is they do have that instilled love of learning, and you go into it with, it's not really an occupation, as they say, a bit of that vocation, and they want to do the best they can. And there's so much that teachers have to learn that inclusion becomes that other thing that they have to pile on top of all the other things, but they know how important it is. But you only have a finite amount of time to learn. There's only so much professional development you can do in a day on top of all the other things you have to do.
Yeah.
So I know as an educator, when I get given something that is being put together in a nice, neat package, and I can go through it like your book does and apply strategies that are going to make an impact to the students in my class, you're on to a winner.
Yeah.
In 22 years of teaching, I'm sure your teaching experience has evolved and you've learned many things about inclusion and supporting students with autism or any form of additional needs. Are there any lessons you've learned that surprised you on your 22 years of teaching?
Sure. I think the most surprising lesson I've learned over the years about teaching students with autism can be summarized in the opening quote in my book by Stephen Mark Shaw. He's an autistic professor from New York. And it says, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So there's this misunderstanding, I think, that too many people have, that individuals with autism, they're all the same because they have autism, and that we can just pop them into a category and that's it. Yeah, I remember at uni, like the education we received regarding students with disability was quite basic. We would learn a little bit about the different autistic traits, repetitive behaviors, or not wanting to make eye contact, but we were never really given an in-depth understanding of people with autism. However, as I began my teaching career, it quickly became evident that my students with autism were just as individual as any other student. Of course, there are certain traits that they share, sensory sensitivities and so forth, or maybe being sensitive to sound or light or a combination of those things. But in education, one size doesn't fit all. So I think the biggest challenge has been learning to differentiate for my students, not only in how I present the content, but also how my students can express their understanding. Yeah, that's very important for all students, neurotypical or neurodiverse, obviously. But that's been the biggest change for my teaching over the years, I'd say.
Yeah, that quote, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one person with autism. I think that really does sum it up, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to look at the person and realize what is their skill set that they do have. How do they like to communicate? What's their best way of learning? How they show you their learning? And I guess as well, how you connect with that student, because we know how important connection is. So if you're not speaking the same language as that student and they can't understand that you're on their side, then the learning is going to be so much more difficult.
Yeah.
It all comes down to that facet really of differentiation and how you cater for the needs of the student, but not automatically going, oh, this is a student with autism. I already know what they need. And it's actually like you would with any student, right? You realize there's so many more layers to it. I always think of Shrek, where he talks about the onion and you peel back the layers to get to know the person. And I think it's like that with a neurodiverse or a neurotypical person. I love how your book dives into breaking down barriers to inclusion for students with autism who are neurodiverse. Can you share a key takeaway or message that you hope readers will walk away with? So if we could put it in a nice little neat bow, what is a key message that we could pass on to educators, people everywhere?
Yeah, for sure. I think the most important takeaway is that inclusion isn't optional. It's our duty and our privilege to make sure that every student is given the opportunity to learn and participate to the best of their abilities. And as teachers, it's our job to figure out what accommodations need to be made to ensure that happens. But it's never okay just to leave that student out of an activity because it's too hard for us, or to assume that they can't do something, or even that they don't want to do something, which from a lot of experience, that may well be the case. I can't even tell you the number of times I've had students come up to me and say, oh, I don't want to do that, or I can't do that. But again, it's up to us to gently push our students beyond their comfort zone and show them that they're capable of so much more than they even realize. And I've been guilty of this too, sadly, assuming that a student can't do something, and they've proven me wrong again and again. It's the one time I love being wrong. So sometimes it's taken a while for them to get there, but in the end they do. Yeah, so there's a student that I taught who would only ever repeat words back to you. So if you asked them a question, they would just repeat the question, but they'd never answer it. And then after a few years, they began to answer the question. And that was so exciting. Just to see that development firsthand was really heartwarming. So
Oh,
we can never assume that they can't do something.
yes. We know what happens when you assume, isn't it? But I love that. Inclusivity isn't optional.
Yeah.
I feel like the biggest barrier that I faced as a teacher was time. Like I only
Oh, yeah.
had so much time in the
Yeah.
day for the students in my class. And then to factor in, you have 24 or more students. And
Yeah.
how do you cater for each individual student?
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of takeaways for some of those barriers that teachers face and how they could maybe overcome it with
Yeah.
one little word of wisdom from Eliza?
Yeah, so many barriers for sure. I think the biggest barrier is just a lack of knowledge and just not knowing where to start. As we said earlier, teachers want to be inclusive, they want to do what's best for their students. And university, it's great. We learn a lot, but we're never really prepared for the reality of a diverse classroom and the daily expectations of a teacher. So, if I may promote my book, there's a lot of great information in there. Practical classroom strategies, communication techniques, modifications for the curriculum. You could also ask the school to run some PL on inclusive classrooms. No guarantee that will happen. So, I would suggest then also putting it in your PDP. I know New South Wales schools do that. I assume other schools in other states have that as well, your personal development plan. If you put it in there that one of your goals is learning more about inclusive classrooms, then the school is obliged to support you in that, to give you some opportunities to reach that goal. So yeah, that's one thing that you can do. Another barrier is not being flexible enough in your teaching. In chapter 4, I talk about universal design for learning. So these are 3 key elements: representation, engagement, and expression. And it involves designing curriculum and learning environments that are accessible to students from the outset, like rather than changing things later on and trying to adapt things. So, representation involves presenting information in multiple ways to cater to different learning styles. Engagement focuses on providing various ways to motivate the students, and expression allows students to demonstrate their knowledge in diverse forms. So, as I mentioned earlier, education isn't a one size fits all situation. If you approach your teaching with these elements in mind, then you're well on your way to an inclusive classroom. Like, all of that is easier said than done, obviously, which leads me to the last barrier, which you mentioned earlier, just finding the time to implement the changes. Like, I've literally never heard a teacher say, I have nothing to do. You know, you've got this long list, you cross something off, you put 2 more things on. So we're swamped constantly with lesson prep, meetings, duties. Sometimes you don't eat till the end of the day. So we're incredibly busy, but the key is to just choose 1 or 2 things you'd like to change and just focus on those. Make sure you do them properly. Don't attempt an entire classroom overhaul, because you'll end up doing nothing properly
Yeah.
and you'll get so overwhelmed. So finding one thing that you want to change, that you want to implement in the classroom, and just get
Give it
that
a
one.
go.
Do that one. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I love how you said a lot of teachers are like, where do I start? So letting your administration know, hey, I would like to learn more about inclusive classrooms. I would say I'm pretty sure every teacher would want that. So I'm sure there are administrators who are now just going, we just put this on the yearly training because it is necessary. It's evolving. We're learning more about people's brains and how they operate. I love how you have that breakdown of that inclusive classroom of representation, engagement, and expression. And Ashley and I so much talk about when we look at differentiation or inclusiveness, that there are multiple ways to teach a concept.
Yeah.
There are various ways for you to engage the students in the learning process. And there are many ways that they can express their understanding. And for teachers starting out, or even teachers who have been in the game for a while and got used to doing it a certain way, what you're saying about that flexibility can be tough to shake if you're like, I've always done it this way. And you're
I've
like,
already got the worksheets.
yeah. And it's ideally, only it might be hitting the mark 50% of the time. But hey, can we try and increase those statistics to be like, I'm hitting the mark 60% of the time or 70% of the time? Or I'm actually just slowing down my pace of learning to be able to allow them that time to present it in a different way or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So you touched on there are small adjustments that teachers can make. What would be one classroom strategy that a teacher's listening today and they're like, you know what, I actually want to be proactive? What is one thing that they could try and do to make a difference for the students in their classroom with inclusive learning?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much the entirety of Chapter 2, Practical Classroom Strategies, it gives so many useful tips. There's different sections: designing autism-friendly learning environments, visual aids and supports, positive behavior management, transitions, sensory integration. And I don't know that you could say that any of those is the most effective, but I'll just talk about a few that are really easy to implement. Classroom setup, that's really important for students with autism and all students in the classroom, really. But establishing clearly defined spaces for different activities can help reduce the anxiety for students with autism because they know what the expectations are within each of those zones. So you might have a quiet reading area and then a desk work area where the noise is minimum and kids understand that, and then another area where they discuss things and they know that they can talk more freely there, and signs can be helpful. I think that's, I would assume, what is happening in a lot of classrooms anyway, that sort of area, making areas, but that's just something to think of. That's a really easy thing to implement. Visual aids for students can make such a huge difference. So you might have a visual schedule that outlines the day's activities, for example, and that can really help reduce anxiety because they can see this is what's coming up, anticipate the day, and then it just reduces that anxiety between the transitioning periods as well. You can also use the visuals on students' desks to break down activities into smaller tasks. If they're feeling overwhelmed with the tasks that they've been set, you can give them visuals. Okay, first you're just going to put your name at the top. Then you're going to do whatever the next thing is. So if they're on their desk, then they can work through the steps themselves. So that can be really helpful. Board Maker is a great program, but that's paid. I'm pretty sure you've got to pay for, I'm not 100% sure, but if your school has Board Maker, that's a really good program for visuals. They're really simple, which is so important. The kids need to be able to look at it and see exactly what that is representing. Although another school, we've just used visuals from Twinkle.
Yeah. And I think as well, a lot of teachers now get free access to Canva, and Canva has a plethora of graphics as well. So if you we'll link Boardmaker in the show notes. But if you're like, oh, I've got a bit of time up my sleeve, I like to be creative. But I love how you talk about that visual aid on their table, that you can make it so specific to that student's need. So everyone has one of those, but you might find some students in your class need to use that more throughout the day than other students might.
Yeah. And just, what do I do when I'm finished? When you're finished, you put your sheet in the tray. It can be really small instructions. It can be bigger instructions. But yeah, just so they know and feel more in control as well of their work and what they're doing. So that can be really helpful. Timers are great in a classroom. I'm sure every classroom has timers.
Can I do a secret confession that with my Apple Watch, the two features I love, the first one, obviously, it tells me the time. Two, if I lose my phone, I can beep it and I find it. The third thing that I use the most on my Apple Watch is the timer feature. It is a game changer for any educator. So if you think, if it is super helpful to me, pretty sure I'm neurotypical. If it's helpful to me, imagine how helpful it is to your
Exactly.
students. Like my daughter will come home, she goes, oh my God, Mum, we had the bomb timer today. It creates those boundaries of knowing this is what I'm expected to do within this time frame.
That's right. Yeah. So I think the tricky thing is, though, there are so many different types of timers. Count up, count down. You've got the stand timers, water timers. For some kids with autism, a buzzer is going to stress them out and they're going to be waiting for the buzzer. They won't do any work because they're waiting for the buzzer
Yeah.
and they're anticipating that. Or another student might need the buzzer.
Yeah.
So you've got to trial things out and see what's best. But yeah, I could not survive in a classroom without a timer of some sort. For myself as well, like doing parent-teacher interviews, I'm always putting that timer on.
Yes, I've seen teachers who put a massive timer up for the parents to see too,
Oh,
to
yeah.
be like, well, we're all accountable here to keep this
Yes.
pace.
Yes.
And if we need to talk more, that's another meeting. But
Yeah.
yeah, it keeps everyone in check.
It does. And now I think another easy thing to implement would be sensory breaks. I think movement breaks, it's quite common in the classrooms these days to be having movement breaks for all the kids. It's really something that we're learning more about that is just so beneficial. But our students with autism may need more than that, may need a sensory break where they're just going somewhere quiet. They might need a fidget spinner to play with or a weighted blanket to just lie down with. Yeah, so just having a lot of different things for them to play with, sensory toys, just to give them those extra breaks so that they can come back ready to go, more focused. Yeah, but as I said earlier, don't try and do everything.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. You'll get stressed out. The students will be like, what's happened to my classroom? You've changed everything.
Oh, absolutely. The most interesting thing that you said was talking about the classroom setup and having clearly defined zones. And I know when teachers might have a limited amount of space, they might not be able to clearly
Yeah, that is
define
true.
zones, but having that at the forefront of your mind of if you've got any neurotypical students, they know if you're working at these desks, this is your focus time. If you move over to the mat here, this is where you can do collaborative tasks or you can do independent or over by the books there. But I would actually say I feel like I didn't probably explicitly teach my students that at the beginning of the year. And now after talking to you, I would do that differently.
Okay, yeah.
The visual aids.
They do need to be taught those things. And
Yes.
we assume it's the book area. Of course, it's quiet. That might be what we are assuming they will assume.
Yes.
But, no, we're not noisy in that
Yeah.
area.
And I think that's it, isn't it? That we forget as educators at times, or I feel like maybe the ones who are coming through now, I don't know what training is like now, but there's this element of you do have to give explicit instruction.
Yeah.
And explicit instruction sets the foundation for everyone to know that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with having that anchor chart of these are the regular steps that we do for when we get our work, we write our name. When we finish our work, it always goes here. And I guess we always say to educators, that's your first couple of weeks in the classroom. You are just really explicitly teaching that classroom setup. And there is no problem in recapping that at the start of the term. Or I always found halfway through the year, I'm like, oh, the wheels have fallen off. We just need to come back and explicitly teach that. And I guess it's just realizing that you might just need to do that more frequently at the beginning. But once a particular student, I know there'd be some students who were neurodiverse who you tell them that, they got it. They were then telling other people about it. But then there are other students who wouldn't be like that and they would need that constant reminding. So it really is that juggling act of getting to know your students, to know what they need to cater for that inclusiveness.
Yeah, they may need it at the start of every lesson for you to ask the question, so how do we behave in this area, before we get going?
I feel like the ones that you've shared there of classroom setup, visual aids, timers, and sensory breaks, I feel like they're really nice ones to ease yourself in. And it may be that you're doing them, but you might have not been consistent in them. I know we just did a great episode 81 on brain breaks or sensory breaks. And you might be going, oh, I haven't been doing them as frequently, but I need a bit more consistent with it. And you go, you know what? This is my focus for this term. I'm going to really nail down those sensory breaks and see how it's impacting and improving the learning in my classroom. So I love those suggestions, Eliza. They are very practical. I think sometimes as teachers, we forget that we have this other source in our classroom. And I'm talking about the peers and the students. What role do peers play in fostering inclusion And how can teachers encourage positive peer interactions?
Yeah. Oh, peers are vital for inclusion. They really are. Yeah, I've got a chapter 5, classroom and peer engagement. So I do talk about that in the book. And we all have this deep need to connect with people and to be included. And it's just as true for neurodiverse kids. The issue for them is that they find the process of interacting so much more difficult than their neurotypical peers. They may have trouble interpreting body language or navigating social cues, but if we don't have their peers on board, then there is no inclusion. So it's up to us as the teachers to educate all of our students on diversity and inclusion. So a few of the strategies I talk about in the book might be having a buddy system for students who find social interactions challenging, or using storytelling and role play to demonstrate what positive interactions look like and sound like. When doing group work, assigning roles to help students understand their place and have a meaningful contribution. Because I think that can be quite stressful in group situations for neurodiverse kids when they're like, I'm not sure what I'm meant to be doing, and I don't know what questions to ask in order to do something, so I'll just sit back. And then it may look to their peers like they don't want to be involved. Giving them a task, this is your job, this is what you're going to do. And to all the students, everybody has a job in this task, and that just gives everybody an equal footing on participating. And I think another thing that's really important is always praising that positive interactions that you're seeing in the classroom. And I've got a really beautiful story of positive interactions out in the real world. So a few months ago, I was helping out at a Come and Try Athletics Carnival. The New South Wales School Sport Unit runs them. And kids from SSPs and support units, primary and high school, they come and participate in a whole range of athletic activities. A shout out to the guys who run that. It's an absolutely fabulous program that they're running. And if your school is not involved, then I highly suggest you go to New South Wales School Sport Unit and find out about that. But I was taking the javelin, and I had a high school group come to me, and I noticed that after every throw, there'd be 3 or 4 students giving them a cheer or some kind of positive feedback. And I had seen that from other schools a little bit, but not to this extent. They were noticeably and consistently positive with each other, which was just so beautiful to see. And when I spoke to the teacher in charge at the end, he was so thankful for that positive feedback and that I had noticed that, because he said they've actually been working really hard on it. So at the end of every day, every student would be allocated a peer that they had to say something positive about for the day. So it might be a positive comment about their behavior or about the work that they'd done. Yeah, but it just showed that all the effort that the teachers had been putting in to these students and, trying to encourage that positive interactions paying off naturally. They were not telling them to cheer for their friends. They were just doing it. So, yeah, it really starts with us, the teachers, we need to lead by example, how to be positive with each other. And then you need to create opportunities for the students to connect in meaningful ways. And then if all goes well, that will lead to naturally inclusive atmosphere within the classroom. We need to create those situations first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love how that story you shared, that you go, oh, that's actually pretty simple. Like, it won't take much time out of my day. That you wrap up the end of your day by everyone finding a partner or a different person from the day before and just tell them something positive that they saw or something they appreciated that they did, but giving them the opportunities. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in, I've got to get this done and I've got to deliver this content because we need to make sure we've got this outcome, that you sometimes steal those opportunities from your students.
Yeah.
But I love the buddy system, the role play, and the assigning roles. Like I've seen that done really well in a science program over here in Australia called Primary Connections, where the three people in the group have a role. When I think back on it, that worked really well because
Yeah.
everyone knew what they needed to do.
Yeah.
And if you take that same model and apply it to whether you're playing a game or whether you're doing a group project,
Yeah.
now I look back and I'm like, that's a really smart idea. So even if you take from this episode, I'm going to look at how I can maybe assign roles to my reading group rotations that I might
Yeah.
do, and knowing that kids all get the opportunity to try that
Yeah.
role.
Because I think we get stuck in thinking, oh, we want them to be independent, sorted out amongst the group. But that's a terrifying thing to do.
Yeah.
It can be really scary. And then you end up with kids just not participating because they don't know how to involve themselves. And
And
other kids who just take over and,
yes.
and
And
boss
I
everybody around, which is not helpful.
No, absolutely. And I think it's giving kids opportunity to actually say, hey, I need help, be a bit vulnerable
Yeah.
and be like, I'm not quite getting this. Can you give me a hand? Or what am I
Yeah.
supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And if you have those students who are that naturally inclined to take charge, they will love it and go, oh, of course, I'll show you what to do. As I think
Yeah.
of my daughter who will happily do that and go, come on, come this way. And I think that's it, right? Everyone in your classroom have strengths, they have weaknesses, they have growths that they areas they want to further develop. And I think giving
Yeah.
that opportunity with their peers to flex those muscles is so important. So
Yes.
important. I love that. What chapter was it in your book? Was it chapter 5?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's,
chapter 5, classroom and peer engagement.
I can imagine that's one of those like dog-eared chapters and highlights and
Yeah.
little tabs coming out of it. So, are there some tools or resources or organizations that you would recommend for teachers to learn more about supporting students with autism, and just letting our listeners know anything that Eliza shares, I will share in the show notes for you to
Yeah.
link to. But yeah, where's a good go-to for some teachers who are immediately ready to take action and learn more?
Yeah, I think there are two really good websites that share information about autism. Is an Australian one called amaze.org.au. A lot of information there, support services as well, and resources about autism. And there's a similar one that's US based called autismspeaks.org. So they're really good websites just for gathering that information and finding resources in your area. And then another Australian one that's really good, specifically for teachers wanting to implement a more inclusive classroom, is Inclusion Ed, so just ed.edu.au. So Inclusion Ed is pretty much chapter 2 of my book in video form. So it's got a lot of videos on how to implement the visuals or using a timer and that sort of thing. For all those visual learners out there, this is a really good website to go to get those ideas and see what does it actually look like. How do I actually implement it? Because there's only so much you can get from a book if you're a visual learner and you need to see it in action.
Yeah,
So that's a good
absolutely.
one.
You can never have too much learning. Repetition, there are things that you need to
true.
get exposed to on a regular basis, or just like a refresher. Now, you're a case study lady. You love sharing success stories. Can you share one more that made a significant difference for a student with autism?
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of my teaching has been in support units rather than in mainstream classrooms. So inclusion does look a little bit different from students with autism in a mainstream classroom. But one of my students, when he was in year 6, I knew that there was going to be a lot of significant activities happening around that, special photos and all sorts of special activities and so forth. But sadly, there was an assumption from the mainstream staff that this student wouldn't want to participate or he wouldn't be able to participate. So I knew that I'd have to be the one who was proactive, find out what things were happening and when, because they just were not going to remember to tell me, which was frustrating, but the reality. Found out all the things, he participated, and the social interactions that this student made throughout the year was so influential to his social development. It was really exciting. And by advocating for his involvement, it ensured that he didn't miss out, and his confidence blossomed as a result, which was really great to see. But it also positively influenced the students from the mainstream classes because they were able to develop their understanding and appreciation of his unique needs. Just knowing that it wasn't just benefiting him, it was benefiting those students and all the teachers involved as well, showing again that we can't assume that
Yeah.
that children with autism can't or don't want to participate. So yeah, that was quite an exciting thing to see.
So how do you see the conversation around inclusion evolving in the next few years? What changes would you like to see in the school and the communities?
I think the conversation around inclusion, it's only going to become more prevalent as society at large becomes more educated and continues to advocate for change. Now, while teachers can make a lot of changes themselves in their own classroom to create more inclusive learning environments, systemic change is really what's needed. So more training, more resources for the teachers to implement inclusive classrooms. As I mentioned earlier, the universal design for learning, that's been in the New South Wales curriculum for the last 5 years or so. Like teachers who have been in the game for a really long time may be less familiar with those principles of engagement, representation, and expression. So teachers educating themselves. We can't just say the school hasn't taught me that. It's up to the teachers. Okay, what's out there? What do I need to learn? So educating themselves as well. But then, yeah, the schools helping to make sure that those things are embedded in programming, not just hoping that inclusion is happening, keeping everybody accountable on that. I think I'd also like to see more of a holistic approach adapted in schools. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen at all, but there's no doubt that schools are judged by the academic success of students, like quite heavily. But a student's academic outcome is not the be all and end all. And we need to take into consideration social, emotional, mental well-being. That's all vital for a well-rounded individual. For me, I've got 3 teenagers and they could not be more different academically. One of them is not academically inclined, is how I word it. She has many strengths, but academics is not her thing. Another one, she works really hard to get great results. And then my third does not try at all, but still manages to nail everything. And it is so frustrating. But as a parent, like that is not what's most important to me at all, how they're going academically. If they're doing well, that's great. If they're not, that's okay. For me, what's more important is how they're going socially, emotionally, mentally. Do they have a supportive friendship group? Are they being kind to others? Are they dealing with the stress of school? Yeah, that matters more to me. And I think, especially in a diverse classroom, those things are so important. So continuing from that, just I think changing our definition of success.
Oh, yes.
So we need to celebrate a range of student achievements as part of the inclusive classroom. Being successful doesn't mean getting 100% on a test. Our students, they're going to demonstrate a wide range of abilities and skills. So it's up to us to make sure that they feel valued and confident in what they bring to the classroom.
I think you summed that up beautifully. There are so many layers to inclusiveness, but looking at it holistically and very much that systemic change. But I'd like to say we're slowly seeing that, and it's still in the process as we have these conversations and get these conversations out into the community. It's with that and talking about it brings the change that needs to take place.
Yeah, speaking of community, I think we're still hearing too many stories from parents where they've taken their kids to join the local dance group and they haven't been accepted. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't really know how to deal with your child. They need to be ready for students who are not going to fit the mold. They need to educate themselves, these groups that are outside the school gate.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
don't just assume you are going to get neurodiverse kids, and how are you going to cater for that when it happens? Not if it happens, but when it happens.
Still a lot to be done.
Yes, indeed. We've come a long way from the 1940s. That's for
Yes.
sure.
We're 80 years in and we've still got a lot to do. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
having these conversations allows for that change to slowly happen. And I think if the next generation is seeing how we're approaching it, it has that ripple effect. As my husband says, for real change to happen, a few people have to die off in their old ways. And I'm like, oh, okay. But there is a bit of truth to that. But
Yep, sadly.
sorry, recent Australian election, it brings out all those sorts of discussions.
It does. I feel like I've had that exact discussion.
To our beautiful listeners, what we've been doing is we've been getting our guests to leave a secret question for the next guest. So Eliza's left one with us, which we won't divulge today or be put in a next episode. But a previous guest has left a question for Eliza, which is, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Yeah. Okay. So my high school self, I've thought about this often. I would tell my high school self, stop worrying about what other people think of you, because I should know better by now. I still do, but I'm so much better than I was. I wouldn't do things I wanted to do because I was worried about what other people thought. It's a waste of energy. So that would be one thing. My young school teacher self, probably don't think you're going to know everything, because you will not. So ask for help. I think the more experienced teachers, we forget that you guys may not know things that we're like, yeah, but we've been doing this, you should know. Actually, you may not have learnt that at uni. So it's okay to ask for help. Even if your more experienced colleagues are assuming you know how to do something, they shouldn't be assuming you know how to do something, because you may not have been taught. So if you don't know, don't be afraid to ask. If you need help with something, don't be afraid to ask someone.
I think they're two beautiful pieces of advice that I would have also given to my younger self. So, Eliza, you have written the book, Confidently Teach Students with Autism. Can you tell our listeners, where can they find this amazing book of yours?
Sure. Yeah, it's available on Amazon. So all marketplaces across the world. There should be a universal link. So you can click on that, take you to whichever Amazon marketplace is yours. And it's available Kindle and paperback in Australia, and in some countries, hardcover as well.
Awesome. We will link that in the show notes.
Lovely.
Eliza, it has been such a delight to talk to you about this topic of inclusiveness, students with autism, and just shining the light on how we can cater for everybody in our classroom and in our world, and to treat them all as respectfully as one should.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Eliza as much as I did. Her dedication to inclusivity and her wealth of experience are truly inspiring. And I hope this is just the start of you and I continuing that conversation about inclusivity for anybody, whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical. Now, if you'd like to dive deeper into Eliza's work or grab a copy of her book, Confidently Teach Students with Autism, you'll find all the details in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. And as we say at Rainbow Sky, there are rainbows ahead, and together we're unstoppable.